I want to open this session this evening and welcome everyone to our discussion about food system security in the Comox Valley. I'm Alice DeWolf, board member of the new Sentinel Educational Foundation, and I'm co-hosting this next hour with Dolores Broughton, the editor of the Watershed Sentinel. To open, I want to honor and appreciate the Comox First Nation. We're hosting this event from their unceded territory. Their story is teaching us all that the land, the air, and the water around us, their beauty, their ferocity, and their capacity to be abundant are inseparable from our well-being as individuals and as community. We thank them for their generosity with these lessons. So Dolores.
Yes. Oh, it's my turn. Yes. Okay, it looks like, we now have 36 people. So people are still coming in quite quickly now. And we're really excited that everybody's here today. If you'd like to let us know where you're from and what First Nations land you're on, you can put that in the chat box. And also, if you're having problems with anything, we'll try and help you through the chat. There are people who are a little more technically advanced than I am doing that. After our presenters, we're going to open up for questions, so you can put them in the chat, and I'm going to collate them all, and hopefully I will be able to, if you leave your name, if I have your name, I can call on you to ask your own question instead of, being overridden by facilitators. So I think that's it. Alice, take it away.
Okay. So we've been thinking about this for quite a while. Our goal for this evening is to update those of us who are concerned about the security of the food system in the Comox Valley, and to get excited about the possibilities of strengthening it. We're fortunate to live on Vancouver Island in a location that the Indigenous people used to refer to as abundance. It's capable of producing a remarkable variety of food, but local goods are not a large component of our food supply. And like most communities, we're dependent on supplies from elsewhere. We are, however, very fortunate to have passionate activists in the Valley who believe that in order to have a sustainable food system, not to mention a healthy community, we need to strengthen local food production and distribution. We have this evening with us three people who are absolutely central to this work here. Arzina Hamir of Amara Farms, and the current vice chair of the Comox Valley Regional District is with us. And Maurita Prato and James McKerricher of the Lush Valley Food Action Society are also with us. We're going to hear from them about two central components of the food system, production and distribution, and I suspect that's going to sort of weave in and out. I think we all want to know the extent to which our system is vulnerable, what's particularly challenging right now, what are its strengths and where are the opportunities, and where might we become more engaged. So very briefly, for those of us who are not right in the midst of this work, I want to start with a couple of quick sketches. And I'm going to share a screen here. Give me just a second to do that. So I wanted to, when we were preparing for this, I was thinking about food and food security, and then somewhere along the line, I got the notion that indeed we're talking about a food system, and thought I just wanted to share this screen. I like it because it begins to kind of capture some of the complexity of what a food system looks like. So it's not just the middle part where you have farmers who are producing for markets and processing food, storing it, and getting it out to consumers. But you've also got a whole bunch of concerns about waste. You've got concerns about education. regulation, policy, how the markets are organized. There's a whole series of interconnected issues to be thinking about. And again, as we're thinking about this, there's so many issues that are all interconnected. As I was sort of saying, our food systems are complex. And the issues here are not unlike issues in many other parts of the world. Our presenters are going to talk about a couple of these, I think. But I just want to note that we come to this evening after 3 years of COVID that's exposed a number of completely crucial vulnerabilities. And that currently many of these concerns are talked about as high costs or, inflation. But that simply masks the complexity of how all of these issues are interconnected. Not the least, I think, that's top of the mind for many of us is the climate crisis or crises that affect the production of our food here in the Okanagan, in the Fraser Valley, and are one of our big suppliers in California. One of the other things that was sort of in front of us as we were, thinking about this, we're looking at the Comox Valley. So, how do we gather information about what's available in the Comox Valley? And this is just a snapshot of both who we are, how much land is here, and what's being produced on it. I think the important short story is that there's a considerable market. There are a considerable number of us here, and that there's very little land in the Comox Valley that's being used for human food production. It's something that a number of us are deeply and passionately involved in, but there's a lot of room. There's been actually a remarkable amount of work going on, and you can see from this slide that a lot of it's been happening in the last 3 years since COVID. I think since Lush Valley has decided to take up a whole bunch of this work, that there's a lot of work being happening. We're going to post this little presentation on the Watershed Sentinel and the Sentinel Educational Foundation websites. So you can take a look at these resources in some detail and come back to them, because there actually is right now a considerable amount of information available. So, I would like us to continue into the presentations. Dolores, you're muted.
Yes. Okay, I'm really thrilled to introduce Arzina Amir. She's a certified organic vegetable and fruit farmer in the valley, in the Comox Valley, and she was elected to the Comox Valley Regional District in 2018. She's the Regional District Vice Chair and a Director for Rural Area B. Arzeena began her farming career in 2008 in Richmond after completing her master's degree in sustainable agriculture. She lived overseas for a number of years. When she and her husband moved to the Comox Valley in 2012, they started Amara Farm, and seeing the lack of supports for small-scale growers, she started the Mid-Island Farmers Institute in 2016. She's an advocate for food security, climate resilience, and regenerative farming. Arzeena also sits on the boards of Young Agrarians, Farm to Cafeteria Canada, and the Columbia Institute. Welcome, Arzeena.
Thank you. And thanks to both you and Alice for hosting this. I know it's a lot of time and energy putting things like this together, but so important. The conversation around food security is one that I think is long overdue. And especially as Alice mentioned, we've seen like so much has been laid bare to us through COVID that I think it's time that we discuss what we saw and how to prevent maybe something like this happening again. So I'm just going to share my screen and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing in the vulnerabilities of the food system from a farming and production standpoint. And I'm sure both Maurita and James will talk more distribution and perhaps processing too. So as was mentioned, the Comox Valley is known as the land of plenty. And often when we think about food abundance, this is kind of what comes to mind. But I just want to hearken everybody back to those days in 2020 when you went into your local supermarket and saw bare shelves. Interestingly for me, I've been a vegetarian for almost 35 years. And what I saw missing was tofu products, the vegetarian protein sources. And that just kind of really shook me. I mean, I knew they're imported. I know they're not grown even in Canada for the most part, but processed here. It showed me how vulnerable I personally was on where my protein was coming from. And I've actually, since COVID, began eating local seafood as a way of decreasing my own personal vulnerability. And I'm happy to discuss that issue with anyone, later. But I want to lay some statistics open, and we've mentioned some of these already, specific to the Comox Valley, but I don't think this is unusual for most parts of BC. So, back in 1960, almost 80% of the food that was eaten on Vancouver Island was grown here. Today, we are actually down to only 4%. And that will primarily be in the dairy and supply managed commodities, because we know those commodities are strictly regulated and we have certain quantities of those foodstuffs available, eggs, poultry, milk. We are sorely lacking in produce, in vegetables and fruit on Vancouver Island, possibly because they are incredibly labor intensive. And we've all seen what is happening to the labor market right now. We also have an aging workforce in the farming sector. The average age, the last time I checked the census, was for the Comox Valley, average age of farmers is 57. Now I'm approaching that age, and already my knees are feeling the strain, as is my back. And vegetable and fruit production is very much requires there's a lot of physicality in that. Here is one statistic that I just got today, which really shook me. The gross margin for farming back in 2011, so back when I actually started farming here in the Comox Valley, was around 25%. Not a huge margin, but enough for farmers to actually make a living. Today, since the 2021 census, that has dropped to 4.3%. That's the slim profit that farmers are making once all of their input costs and their labor costs are deducted. That's all that is left on the table for farmers. So I guess, it's no wonder we're seeing a bit of a shrinkage in the farming sector in the Comox Valley, and I'm assuming this is the same elsewhere around BC. Some very large shocks to the system have meant that farmers are losing the amount of income that they're making. Dolores and Anne have mentioned a couple of those. COVID was very difficult. Trying to get labor through COVID was hard. But the impact of the war in Ukraine also has been felt here in Canada, specifically in grain prices. And that I see having a huge impact on not only the grain that you eat, specifically if you're eating grain directly, but all of the animals that are fed grain So think of poultry, both meat and eggs. Pork products use a lot of grain. So any animal that's not a ruminant, like a sheep or a cow, is going to be highly dependent on grain. And Vancouver Island is not a good grain producing area. If anything brings that to light, it's this year, 2022, where many of the producers who even do grow grain here were not even able to get in and plant this spring because the weather was so difficult. We've had a very hard year in 2022. I won't go into this slide because already Anne has posted, what a food system looks like. But I do want to list what here in the Comox Valley, what I see that we really do need. We do need more farmers growing the food that we're eating. We're seeing that shrinkage happening. We need more people, individuals, but also institutions like our schools, our governments, our hospitals, our colleges to be purchasing local food. We've lost much of the processing infrastructure that was here in the Comox Valley. Even as far back as the 80s, we had a fairly robust vegetable marketing board based here that had aggregation infrastructure available for small scale growers. That has pretty much gone, just except for Lush. And, I'm going to leave that for Lush to talk about, but that has been a wonderful addition very recently to our system. We also are lacking a lot of ways to divert waste out of, and this is food waste, out of the landfill. Many of our grocery stores, the excess produce that goes out the back end goes into the landfill and creates a huge problem with methane production. And we lose many of those nutrients that could have been fed either to humans if they were still in good shape, but also to animals. So that is a vulnerability I see. So, when it comes to farmers, what is possible? We have North Island College training many new farmers here in the Comox Valley, and there is a program that Lush has been in partnership with. And I just want to emphasize that, many of the farmers that are looking at going into agriculture now do not come from farming families. So they're not able to take advantage of generational land transfer. And that is part of the issue when it comes to the low profitability of farming, is many of these farmers are having to pay for land costs. I do see, though, a large number of women entering agriculture, especially in the horticulture side, and a lot of farmers of color and even First Nations farmers, which is really heartening to see. I think we really need a big diversity of people to help us solve the challenges of the 21st century and farming in an era of climate change and unpredictability. I just want to give a shout out to Lush Valley and their Good Food Box program. It has been such a huge help for many small scale growers throughout the valley. I watch and see who Lush is purchasing from on a weekly basis. When they purchase from our farm, these are not small purchases. These are 110 shares worth of produce that are coming out, every week. So this is wonderful, and I would love to see this just keep growing. We do have interest in the Comox Valley in a food hub project, and if we could get our ducks in a row, there is funding from the provincial government for equipment for specifically food processing, so adding value to the primary ingredients that many of us farmers grow. And right now, there's not a lot of access to this type of equipment. So for the most part, vegetable and fruit farmers are primarily selling those products whole and unprocessed, which leaves us vulnerable to when we do have gluts. price drops and not a lot of the ability to take advantage of adding value, making sauces, making jams, syrups, all of that kind of thing, dehydrating. I'm just going to end on a topic that I actually just posted about today on social media. And this is what I was just mentioning, our protein, and where is our protein going to be coming from in the future? I know there's a lot of discussion about the pros and cons of eating meat. I do want to emphasize, though, here in the Comox Valley, we are able to grow a lot of grass really well with very little input, except rainfall and, a bit of fencing. It is possible for us to grow beef very cost effectively because of the rainfall that does come at specific times. Now, I understand not everybody is a beef eater. Other ruminants like sheep could also be produced well here. But for those of us who don't eat a lot of meat products, that does leave us kind of lacking in other sources that where we don't have to depend on that protein being imported from off island. And this is where, potentially, and I'm not one to really look at silver bullets, but I'm looking at hazelnuts myself. 4 years ago, we planted 40 hazelnut trees. And this year we have our first crop that looks like we have about 200 pounds going to be coming off. And I'm really excited about that because that is a local protein source. The hazelnuts seem to be growing here very well with very little input, not a lot of care needed. They seem really well suited to the climate here. And so I just want to put it out there that some of this kind of creative thinking about where our food sources could come from, the kind of food that we are eating, may need to change in the future. We touched on, and I'm going to stop sharing, we touched on the importance that the Comox First Nation placed on their the sea and the bounty that came from our oceans. I think that's actually a link that we're missing right now in our food system. We could be taking advantage of much more of the nutrients that come from the sea, bringing that onto the land, both to eat primarily, but also as a fertility source. So I'm going to leave you there with that question in your head, kind of lingering of sort of the systems and the cycles of where nutrients are traveling right now. Primarily right now, we're importing a lot of fertility from off island. How do we close those loops and make our food system just a bit more resilient in the future? So thank you for that, and I hope I didn't go too over time.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, no? Yeah. I just thank you for that. Absolutely. There are a whole bunch of questions that people that you've generated, already I can see them in the chat about like, what about this and what about that? And what, when are we thinking about these things? And there are, it's both an exciting topic and one that just, I know you've been working on this for a lot of years and it's hard work. And those of us who are in the Valley deeply appreciate the work that you have invested in it and know that there need to be a bunch of other ones like you. So thank you, but thank you. Thanks for the introduction. Now I want to introduce Maurita and Maurita Prato and James McKerricher from the Lush Valley. What's the rest of it? Social action.
Lush Valley Food
What's
Action.
The rest of it?
Food Action Society.
Food Action Society. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Maurita is completely passionate about these issues and tells us that she believes that food systems have the ability to heal people, communities, and the earth. And for over 5 years, we've been very fortunate to have her here in the Valley as the executive director of the Lush Valley which I am going to leave at that. Lush is what we all call it. And for the last 3 years, she's also been the coordinator of the Comox Valley Food Policy Council, which is an interesting initiative. She's got a background in organic farming, school to garden coordination. She's worked as an instructor in food and politics courses at Pacific Rim College. She holds a master's degree in strategic leadership towards sustainability. I love that title. That's a whole, you can get a degree in that. It's really great.
In Sweden.
And she's been living with us in the Comox Valley with her family and her big urban garden. Now, she's co-presenting with James McKerricher. James is the food access manager for Lush Valley. He works with the Comox Valley farmers to support local food production and strengthen the local food system. Alongside his work at Lush, he also runs the Farmer's Kitchen food truck, which collaborates with local farmers to produce creative, vibrant street food, which we all like. James has a background in cooking and has worked as a chef in a variety of locations, and is motivated, and I love this word, by the gustatory pleasures of the Comox Valley. He has a desire to make the joy of delicious local food more accessible for everyone. So James and Maurita, please.
Thank you so much, Alice, for that introduction. And thanks again for putting this together. Arzina, I always learn so much from you and getting to hear you speak. So thanks for that. And one of the strengths really of the Comox Valley, as I see it, is that there is so much passion here around food systems. There is so much expertise, and there is such a willingness to collaborate. And without that collaboration, none of these exciting projects can ever happen. So I am going to share my screen. And the slides that I'm sharing aren't going to make much sense at the beginning, but they'll come around. So let me just go to the slideshow. So I was asked to speak about distribution. And I'm not a distribution expert, but I do nerd out about how food shapes our geography. There's this part of me that is like, it's so fascinating / depressing to really realize that how much global networks shape our geography. And when I was doing my master's in sustainability planning, one of the more interesting things I got to do was talk to this woman named Carol Steele. She has an old TED Talk, it's old now, but it was called How Food Shapes Our Cities. And a big part of that talk was talking about the history of food. And it's not the history of food, it's really the history of food systems that I want to maybe we all know this, but I want to just kind of touch on, because distribution networks have shaped our entire planet, distribution networks for food. And that history, if you go back 10,000 years before present, the distribution was different. We weren't making the food come to us, we were going to our food. And that's still happening a lot in traditional food cultures. We were the ones that we were distributing ourselves to the food. And that's still happening in terms of wildcrafting. That's still happening to some extent as we shorten the food chain and get really like, our garden in our backyard and our fruit tree. That is sort of flipping distribution on its head. And about 10,000 years ago, it's all contested exactly how it happened and when it happened. But that area called the Fertile Crescent, which is Iran, people really started to domesticate grains, and people were able to stay in one place. And we saw the accumulation of grains. And storage is a really important part of the whole story of food and food systems, because once you have storage, you have ability to accumulate grain, that relates to, all kinds of monetary systems, the accumulation of wealth, the stratification of society. So we have this starting to happen 10,000 years before present, then zoom to sort of industrial revolution days in the 1800s in England. And we think about, for example, just one example, but we think about tea as being this sort of quintessential English drink. Before that time, people were drinking beer. You can imagine during the Industrial Revolutions, the capitalists were like, yeah, make them drink tea. But in order to drink tea in England, the only thing that they were producing in England was the milk. So that means the tea was grown in India or China, and the sugar was coming from Africa or the Caribbean. So these distribution networks were being built all over the world, and you know, the rise of this sort of global food system was the rise of the colonial project. And this, you know, our food system's built on colonization, slavery, you know, externalities. You know, externalities are the things that are not factored into the cost of our food. So externalities tend to be, you know, the social issues, you know, slavery, or then people not being paid a fair wage. And what happens to the environment. So pollution of airs and waterways that's not factored into the price of our food. So we are still using, you know, this food system that was sort of built in the 1800s, and then the post-war period happened, and subsidies became a big part of that system, right? So a lot of the commodity grains are still in a subsidized system that sort of gets farmers to grow as much as they can, and then sort of floods the market and the price drops. So I get to nerd out on talking a little bit about this history, but I think we can all imagine that this is an incredibly energy inefficient way to bring food to us, to grow a little bit of that food all over the world, create these giant systems, and then bring that all to us in a location. And, you know, estimates of each calorie being at least, you know, 10, to get 1 calorie to us, you know, between 10 to 25 calories of energy is spent just kind of growing that in different places and getting that to our plates. So it's a really incredibly inefficient system that we've created. And of course, that doesn't even factor in waste. Right now we're, you know, about 50%. I don't know, there's different estimations, but in North America, food gets wasted. So all that energy that goes into growing and distribution, and in the end, so much of it goes to waste. So this inefficiency is a problem. It's a vulnerability, and it's something that we need, you know, we need to spend some time really thinking about. So I think that there is, for us at Lush Valley, for a lot of us maybe that are listening, we know that food is also really like it can be the center of everything, the center of our culture, and there's something there that has so much value, that shortening these supply chains, like just the joy that we get, you know, going to the farmer's market or being able to grow, hey, I grew this in my garden, this tomato, this whatever it is, that we're kind of gravitating towards. And there's a lot of different values layered in there. There's environmental values, there's social values, there's the vulnerability of the climate emergency and what happens if our we can't use our ports to bring food in. So I mean, and Arzeena talked about how important it is, well, so many things, that we have all these different elements of our food system within our local community. And that we've gotten rid of the infrastructure for things like processing. And now there's kind of this movement to bring it back. Some of that movement is through these Ministry of Agriculture, what they're calling food innovation hubs. And then some communities are just doing it, like Lush is just kind of doing it. Okay, so I'm gonna talk, so we did buy, so yeah, so, you know, the work that we're doing at Lush Valley is really this, like, how do we shorten the supply chain? How do we shorten this distribution chain? And we need all of those elements that Alice talked about at the beginning to be localized and shortened in order to make that work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the strengths of the Comox Valley. And we've all said it, Comox means land of plenty. This, we kind of are thinking that all of the people that kind of we call Comox today, so that Aiksin, the Satlut, the Pentlach, the Satsitla, and others who were the caretakers of this land from time immemorial. And we see like just great soil health here, and there's a lot of, you know, just the the abundance of the space, the estuary, all of those things. And our community is still surrounded by farms. So this, again, I feel this is a real strength of the Comox Valley, that farms are visible to where we live. So if I live in Comox, if I drive down Anderton, I see a farm. Farms are not a distant concept for people that live here. We see farms kind of as we go around and about our business, even if we live in urban areas. So I think farms are far more visible. And I'll give an example. When I moved up from the Capital Regional District and I wanted to start a farm cleaning program here, it was a lot easier to do it here because people were closer to farms. You know, in the Capital Regional District, getting people from the urban center to volunteer on farms was harder just because of the geography. So I think that is a real strength, you know, having farms around us and actually just being able to see farms not have, because so much of our global, for example, distribution system or our food system in general is just invisible to us. And I think the fact that we can really see what's happening in the valley is really hopeful and important, and people want to engage when they see what they can be a part of. I think we learned a lot about when the pandemic hit and we wanted to get more local food out to people, particularly kids in schools that weren't able to be going to schools and they needed to, their families needed access to healthy food because there were shortages. We found out that distribution here, like the collaboration of the school district, the collaboration of BC Transit and a whole network of volunteers, that people here are really, when they put their mind to it, really great at collaboration. And so I think that that's a real strength of the Comox Valley in terms of distribution. This slide, I'm going to talk just a little more about the weaknesses and vulnerabilities, which I already spoke to. And I think that, you know, we collectively really get that there's a problem with production. Arzeena put up that 4% and we're all like, yeah, okay, that's a problem. But we also need to give attention to storage, aggregation, processing, as well as distribution. We really do need, you know, even if we grow more food, but we don't have the capacity to just store it or aggregate it or do some processing so that it really extends the season of that produce, then, you know, we need to have all of those pieces. And I think James will talk a little bit about this, but we need to talk about dry and cold storage and processing. COVID, I think, was, you know, a big eye opener for many people. And in some ways, I was actually surprised at how well the global food system did okay, you know, it did fairly well still, but I think that so many people were made aware for the first time how vulnerable our food system actually is when we're depending on global food supply and what happens when there's disruption in the supply chain. You know, I think we do need to be concerned. One of the things that we don't have great data on is what food assets we have on the island. So if there were a major emergency, a storm or an earthquake that could potentially damage our airport or our ferry ports, that could mean that we're cut off. So I did a presentation to the province back a while ago about their proposed budget for 2023. And at the encouragement of my peers and some members of the Food Policy Council, I suggested an island-wide study be conducted that provide a baseline of food assets data. We need to start somewhere. And without that baseline data, I've been told by policymakers that then it's hard to create targets for changing that. So if we want to create targets for how much we're going to produce, we actually need a baseline study of what we can store, what we can process, what we can distribute. And so we need to advocate for this work as kind of a first step towards more creating more infrastructure and capacity. So the other thing that was just asked of us was what we saw coming up or ways to engage. So a really kind of quick slide. Again, anything that you can do to shorten that supply chain. So be it a big garden where you're growing some of your food, encouraging the, you know, encourage going to the farmer's market, encouraging more young or new entrants into farming. There's an agriculture area plan process coming up this fall. There's several ways to get involved with that. You can learn about that through the CVRD. Supporting organizations that support new entrants to farming, like the Farmers Institute that Arzeena talked about, and Young Agrarians. Join the Food Policy Council. We really need people that have time to nerd out on how to do this well, like on these policies and what's gonna make change happen. So we're always looking for folks that are interested and have some time. And field days, there's some great, I think the transfer of knowledge on farms is really important. So there was just a field day at Lentulus Farm a couple of weeks ago that's looking at cover crops. And so we're going to see more and more, there's more and more need for that in terms of climate adaptation and mitigation practice. And I am going to hand it over to James.
Thanks, Maurita. Yeah, thanks for having me along as part of this conversation. It's great to be here. Yeah, it's funny that we have been asked to talk a lot about distribution. And I feel like kind of what was been said so far is that, distribution actually really isn't the question. I feel like, yes, we do aggregate and distribute food, but I kind of feel like people just come and pick it up from us. And the question is more, how do we create consumer demand for the products that are being offered and get more people within the Comox Valley consuming locally made products and supporting farmers that way. I was happy to see Arzeena sing the praises of the Good Food Box. I like to think of the Good Food Box as being the ultimately flexible consumer, because we work with dozens of farms to fill that Good Food Box every week. And we're having conversations with farmers as individuals to say, what would you like to sell us? What do you really need to get rid of right now? What can you hold on to a little bit longer? And we're working within the Comox Valley to kind of, I like to think of it as ironing out the gluts as much as we're able to as an organization. So we're able to focus our purchasing efforts on an individual farm if they are buried in spinach this particular week and salad turnips the next. And yeah, it's not a perfect solution, but it does go a long ways to supporting a lot of farms that might otherwise be stuck with product that they can't move. And at the other end of the Good Food Box, of course, is a consumer that's receiving these products. And I think a big part of our success in distributing these products and creating consumer demand is, of course, creating consumers that know how to, increasing food education and creating consumers that know how to cook or process these products that they're receiving. As mentioned originally, I'm coming from a culinary background, and the Farmer's Kitchen food truck is a project that I've kind of built that centers that of building a menu around the needs of the farmer. That's why I've called it the Farmer's Kitchen. And I think that really is the root of the distribution issue. As Maurita spoke to, during the COVID years, we really rallied the community, and we hand delivered a lot of food to a lot of individuals with a lot of assistance from a lot of community partners, and it was a heroic effort. But with a central location that is convenient for a large percentage of our community, available with convenient hours, we can also move an incredible amount of food. And I don't think it really boils down to the nuts and bolts of how much cooler capacity we need or how much dry storage we need. Yes, we need those things. But I think of it as, we're approaching it from two ends. We have the farming community in the Comox Valley, which right now is producing 4% of our caloric needs here. And then we have the community that is sourcing food from all over. So it really is, again, coming back to that, increasing consumer demand and increasing support for farmers that way. I think a big part of like a localized cold chain is the beauty of it is that it is so short, and we actually don't rely on massive cold storage infrastructure, because we take it from the farm and it's in someone's house right away. And of course that does lead to issues of, well, houses aren't built like they used to. I know my house doesn't come with a root cellar or much cupboard space really. So coming back to that, how do we get creative with what foods are we going to preserve? What foods are we going to store? And what foods are we going to gorge on when they are to be found in abundance? You know, some things like salad greens and spinach might not lend themselves that well to long-term storage. So when it comes to our role is very much supporting mixed vegetable production. So that is what I focus on. It is a somewhat limited. Yes, we can grow a lot of a huge variety of crops here, but we are limited. We can't grow everything in this climate, and we can't grow year round. So I almost approach our work on a crop by crop basis. Can it be stored? You know, how much storage do we need for it? Can it be preserved? What are the most effective ways to preserve it? And then, yeah, just how quickly can we get that into an individual's home and into their kitchen? I'm sure I've just glazed over a whole bunch of stuff here. I didn't look at my notes at all. Give me a moment here, one sec. Oh yeah, I just wanted to touch a little bit on just some of the other programs that Lush runs. We do run a farm gleaning program. I would still describe it as being a fairly young program. It's been around for a few years, but we haven't had necessarily the dedicated staff person to see that program, through COVID times, et cetera. So it's a program that I think does hold a lot of potential. I'd like to see, I do think that, especially in this current age of labor shortages, we do have a robust group of volunteers that come out that are dedicated to the cause of food security. And I think that they're actually a force that is not to be underestimated. I'd like to see more volunteers engaged on farms and making use of some of the products that might not be sellable through other means. So might not be sellable direct to consumer, but do have great value in the value added stream of things. And then, whenever I talk about the farm gleaning program, I always want to talk about the fruit tree program. I think most people are familiar with this program, but I do think that it is kind of the community orchard that's, it's this huge, abundant thing that is already here. We have this mature fruit tree orchard in our community. It is our community's orchard. And I think it's an asset that we as a community really need to focus energy on and, nurture and develop infrastructure for that piece of that food resource that we have. I love the idea of Comox Valley being apple neutral for at least the month of September in a decent year. Not this year, unfortunately. Yeah, and then there are some other pieces I'd like to touch on just on the distribution side of things. Currently we distribute a lot of product through schools and through other social service providers to individuals. Lush hasn't quite yet had the capacity to help facilitate the connection between farmers and restaurants or other businesses. And the issue of institutions as well. I know Arzeena briefly mentioned institutions, but I think institutions, it comes back to that consumer flexibility. And until institutions can demonstrate a little bit of creativity and flexibility in how they feed their communities, it's always going to be a challenge. So I think that the root of it all is consumer education, consumer flexibility, creativity, and getting people eating new and interesting foods on a more regular basis.
James, we're close.
That's all I have. I'm done.
Oh, that's it. Okay. Yeah. Oh my. All right. All right. Well,
is that okay, or I can keep on going?
No, it's what. No, there's just a whole bunch of questions that I think people are sitting here with, and
so little time. Oh,
and so many questions, so many little time. Such another webinar that needs to happen.
Okay. All right.
Jay, I want to thank you both. You are doing such key work in the valley that I, certainly have been aware of over this last couple of years, and really, really appreciate. So thank you for that, and thanks for opening this up for us.
Okay. So while you're putting any further questions in the chat box, I don't think we'll get to them all, but I have a funny feeling there's another session coming up here, because this is a big discussion and we need to start bringing eaters into the discussion along with the farmers. Eaters and feeders, maybe. Anyway, I want to thank everybody very much for participating this evening. Arzina, Maurita, James, and Sarah from the Watershed Sentinel helped with publicity, and the Sentinel Educational Foundation, and of course, my very own Watershed Sentinel. And especially I want to thank Alice Stoll for her work pulling it together. I'm kind of a fly-by-night person, and she's really systematic. And so that's how she thinks things through, whereas I just have at it. So this is partly because of Alice's hard work. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions in the Q&A because I think they're easy.
I
Mhm.
have I've got a burning question. Just
Oh.
just to kind of,
All right, well,
Arzina, so just Arzina and I'll quick. Arzina and I met at the coffee shop, a month ago or something, and by accident. And you were talking about, there being a window here that we are in, where our source of food from California is going to really dry up. And I just wanted you to very quickly give us a sense of what because there's an urgency to this. There isn't
Absolutely.
it's not something that we've got a long time period necessarily to figure out.
Yeah, and it's an issue that actually we didn't bring up. I know apart from COVID and the war in Ukraine, we have California drying up. And the latest report shows that there is less than 10 years of water left for California, which is the supply for most of our salads and our soft fruits like strawberries and raspberries. And then it will be it. Aquifers are collapsing because of the increased pumping that is coming out of them. And so I think we have that very short window to try and figure out what are going to be the alternatives. Do we just forego, and maybe this is it, forego eating those types of fruits fresh through the winter months and enjoy, as James mentioned, gorging on them when we have them locally here in the summer months, learning how to preserve them through jams and dehydrating for when it's off season. So yeah, that works for the berries, not so much for the salad production, but there is a very short time window. I don't know if either James or Maurita want to chime in on that. Can I also just say we have water issues here in the Comox Valley too.
yes, we do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be increasingly difficult for us
Yeah.
if we are now going to have to grow much of that produce that is water intensive. This is like the third or fourth year in a row where we've had 8 or more weeks of no rain. We haven't had a solid rain since the beginning of July. And water issues are going to be becoming more and more intense.
Okay.
Totally agree.
Thank you.
I'm going to kind of go quickly through some of this stuff. There were questions about whether we can grow lentils here in the valley, and someone else wanted to know about insects. I'm just going to say some of this stuff we cover in the Watershed Sentinel. So you could look up the insect story. We did a big feature on it a while ago. Lentils.
Personally, I think they're iffy. I don't know if anybody else has better experience with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just say that we normally start getting rains right when the lentils are about to mature. I mean, this year aside, we don't have a huge window for lentil production.
Because of the drying.
And we also don't have a lot of land. I mean, pulses and grains, if you want to be eating them in quantity as your major caloric intake, you need, sections of land. But James, go ahead.
I would just add, I think that lentils are, produced, Canada's the #1 exporter of pulses. So I think we're doing a fine job of producing them in our country, and they play a pretty important role in crop rotation in the prairies to supplement grain growing and fixing nitrogen. I don't see a reason why we should be focusing on pulse production here when it's a short train ride away and easily shipped.
And a ferry or two.
And Ellen, I think it was Ellen Rainwater, wanted to know, what about home gardeners? And I have a lot of questions around that because I can't give away what I can grow in 100 square feet. So what do I do? And how much can home gardeners actually weigh in on this situation?
I'll speak up to this. I mean, we saw just such a massive uptake in people wanting to learn how to grow food around the pandemic, which is really great. I mean, I think overnight we started this Grow Food Everywhere, where people were giving tips, and we were doing some distribution of seed and other, you know, seedlings. And there was a huge interest, and I think that it's often overlooked. I think it's often potentially overlooked how much produce can come out of a tiny garden, because your ability to use vertical space. So, you know, if you're growing pole beans instead of bush beans, but underneath that you've got squash and you've got, like, it was a crazy bean year. I don't know if anyone else felt that, but I was pulling off pounds and pounds, like it's still producing like crazy. So if you have diversity in your backyard garden, this year you're going to have a lot of beans. Last year I had tons of, you know, like my tomato production was better because the heat was earlier, like you're going to have, or the berries. So I think the fact that the backyard gardener can have so much diversity, can utilize vertical space, can be really, you know, intensive in the way that they grow food, that it can have a huge impact on our own food security. And I think growing herbs is especially a nice thing. Like if I think about, oh, there's going to be a supply chain disruption, I want things to taste good. So like growing your own herbs, you can do with that, right? That's easy to do. In terms of what do you do when you have a glut? Yeah, I mean, I think there's opportunity to do more things on a neighborhood level. Sometimes we can take gluts at Lush, for example, but we can't take just the small amounts. So I know within my neighborhood, there's a lot of neighborhood exchange, but you know, that does take some organizing and some talking to your neighbors. But yeah, there's a lot of that going on that's just not really, I don't know, talked about or measured.
Can I just add too that cities and urban centers often have a much more robust supply of water. And so if we want to look at more of resiliency in our food supply, maybe we start looking at growing those water intensive crops like salads in more urban areas where you can either collect water off rain off your roofs, or you've got a much more robust city water supply that you can water in, versus, you know, in the rural areas where we're so dependent on either aquifer water or, you know, pulling out of the river.
Right, that's a really good point. I'm thinking that I know that there was a video that World Community was showing about Cuba and how Cuba got hit with a huge problem when Russia cut off. Well, Russia fell apart and they couldn't get oil anymore and they couldn't sell their sugar. So they were like, boom, you're cut off. And they went into a huge backyard gardening and all kinds of other things. And now I see someone's just put this in here. Warren's saying, went to growing 50, I suspect 50% of their food. And I think we might want to look at some of that if we're serious about real sustainability.
Yeah. We're
We're going to have to use all those bits of land. I'm so pleased to see people gardening their front yards in Comox. This is great. So how do we,
James, I really like your expression, the community orchard. You know, and maybe there's also a community carrot patch, you know, and and you know, a community zucchini bin.
oh, that'll be easy. I've got two things I'd love to get to, but I don't know if we have time. One is, how do we make the food hub thing happen?
Mm-hmm.
And let's start with that one.
I'm looking at James. I don't know if you can see me looking at you.
Yeah.
That's a whole other webinar.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, which one? Like there's there's so many different definitions of what a food hub is. Like Lush has got its food hub happening now here. I guess if we're referring to the food hub that's more secondary processing focused right now, through funding through the Ministry of Agriculture, or kind of chasing that Ministry of Ag funding. I don't know if I had the answer. It's I think there's just so many different ideas. I think part of the challenge is that there is just such a nebulous concept, food hub, that there hasn't been like a tangible, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to process, and this is what. So I do think that perhaps we need to identify some of the key secondary processing things that we would like to be producing as a community. Part of the challenge as well is that the people that are a good chunk of the people that are currently involved in conversations around secondary processing are farmers and not necessarily food processors. And we don't actually have like a community of folks that are knocking on the door right now with this, like, I want to make kimchi or I want to make salsa. And I suppose that might be a little bit of a chicken and egg thing. I do think that current proposals for food hubs in the Comox Valley seem a little large for the current scale of farming in the valley, but perhaps looking at intermediate steps that do allow those value add, those food processors to kind of grow their business. I don't think that the Comox Valley is ready for a 20,000 square foot facility that's going to be doing secondary processing, but perhaps like a more kitchen infrastructure that allows folks to kind of dabble in that and then build their business. But I do think that we have to, really have a good look at what crops we produce well here, and not hedge our bets on any one thing, because as we all know, it might not be a good year for beans again next year, or what have you. So it comes down to being a little bit creative and flexible again. Surprise. And looks like Maurita would like to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say before the conversation sort of happened through the CVRD, Lush is part of something else called the VHA Food Hubs, and a lot of those hubs are they're nonprofits similar to Lush Valley, and many of them are running very successful food innovation hubs. The Cowichan Green got some funding there, building theirs. In the South Island Food Hub is building theirs. Tofino Ucluelet Culinary Guild has been operating a food hub for a very long time. So we were actually hoping that the Comox Valley would be looking at a somewhat similar model, because the benefit there is being able to have a nonprofit partner that can partner with farmers and growers. So you can utilize social enterprise, but you can also utilize fundraising from a charitable standpoint, and look at the charitable sector as a market, which is kind of what Lush has really been doing. Like, we've been brokeraging the relationship between farmers and community organizations in the charitable sector, saying like, this is a really important market for farmers and growers, and we need, people that are dealing with food insecurity to have that same, access to locally grown and healthy food. So that unfortunately wasn't really the model that the CVRD sort of leaned towards, and maybe it will be in the future. Maybe it'll be kind of come back to looking at the possibility for a nonprofit-led hub that just, I think, has the ability to leverage a bit more funding. The current proposed model is a farmer co-op, which can also be great, but it requires that investment from a large number of farmers and growers that, so it has yet to be seen kind of how that will play out. But
there's a lot of details there to work out.
There are.
And hopefully some of this may be worked out through our upcoming agricultural area plan, which is something that we're all going to engage in through the fall and into the winter months. Because
would you say a little bit more about that, just as we're ending? And Arzina, there's a question in the chat that I think you can answer, but just online. But just say more about what's coming with that.
Yeah, so an ag area plan is something that farmers in the community participate in and kind of help to set the direction of where they see the agricultural sector going in the future and what they want to see. So it's kind of it's forward thinking. Where are some of the needs in the community, and where could we have growth? And when farmers themselves are identifying things like that, I think it enables funding to then be put in, and government knows where those gaps are and can help support and leverage the community going forward. But it's really tough, and we have, this wonderful, over 400 farmers in the Comox Valley, but we are not always growing in the same direction, if you know what I mean. So my hope is that an ag area plan will actually bring everyone together, and at least we can put on the table what our vision for the future of the agricultural sector is. And then when that vision is kind of communicated out loud, people know which direction that we're going in. And if it is a food hub, all right, then all of us, we need to produce more kale. Maybe we'll be the kale chip capital of Vancouver Island. Very possible, right? Because we grow kale really well here.
Yeah, that's right.
But until it's said and it's supported by the agricultural sector, I think it's really hard for a hub or a processor to really know what is going to be grown in quantity here.
Okay, so that's a lot of work to go through yet. The other aspect of all of this that we haven't even looked at is food waste. And there's a lot of really practical things that could be done about that, but that's going to be another webinar. So,
well, I think on that note, we should close this one, but think that perhaps the next one is one where we're talking about some of the very, very specific, specific projects, the different parts of people, different people in different locations in our communities can be involved in, and the ideas, like the spinning of ideas. I also think it feels like right now there's a lot of room for that to be happening.
And it's such a practical way to deal with climate change, because we're going to get walloped. So we might as well start planning now.
Thanks for that, Maurita.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming. And I'm looking at the chat, the participant list, as if they could know I was looking at them, but I am. Thanks for coming, and thanks so much for all of your contributions, and thanks for growing, and thanks for helping spread the food. Hope we can all meet again. Bye.
Hi, everyone.